Have you noticed something strange about the Ukraine war lately? For years, the conflict has seemed trapped in an endless cycle. Russia attacks. Ukraine responds. New sanctions are announced. New weapons arrive. And yet the war continues. Many people have started to believe that this conflict may never truly end. But what if that assumption is wrong? What if the battlefield is changing in a way that most people haven't noticed? Because behind the headlines, behind the daily reports of drone strikes and missile attacks, a much bigger story is unfolding. A story that could determine not only the future of Ukraine, but also the future of Russia itself. And at the center of that story is a question that military analysts around the world are asking right now. Is Russia beginning to face a level of pressure it cannot sustain forever? Today, we're going to examine the strategy that Ukraine is using to increase that pressure, why Russia's leadership is becoming increasingly concerned about the long-term consequences of the war, and whether the next few months could become some of the most important of the entire conflict. But before we begin, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications because we bring you in-depth analysis of the world's most important military and geopolitical events. Now, let's get started. When Russia launched its invasion of Ukraine in February 2022, many experts expected a short war. Russia possessed one of the largest militaries on Earth. It had thousands of tanks, hundreds of combat aircraft, massive artillery stockpiles, and a defense budget far larger than Ukraine's. The expectation was simple. Russia would overwhelm Ukraine quickly, force political concessions, and declare victory. That prediction turned out to be completely wrong. Instead, Ukraine resisted. Western nations began sending military aid. New sanctions targeted the Russian economy. And what was supposed to be a rapid campaign transformed into a grinding war of attrition. Years later, both sides are still fighting. But the conflict of today looks very different from the conflict of 2022. Modern warfare is changing before our eyes. Drone technology has become one of the most important weapons on the battlefield. Long-range strikes are reaching targets hundreds and sometimes thousands of kilometers away. Economic pressure is becoming just as important as military pressure. And political stability has become a battlefield of its own. This is where Ukraine believes it has an opportunity. The country's leadership understands a simple reality. Defeating Russia outright on the battlefield would be extremely difficult. But forcing Russia into a position where continuing the war becomes increasingly costly? That is a different challenge altogether. The goal is not necessarily to achieve a dramatic military collapse. The goal is to create pressure. Economic pressure. Military pressure. Political pressure. And perhaps most importantly, public pressure. Because throughout history, wars have often ended not only when armies run out of resources, but when governments begin to question whether the cost is worth paying. That is why Ukraine has focused heavily on expanding its drone capabilities. Over the last few years, Ukrainian engineers and military planners have transformed drones from supporting tools into strategic weapons. Refineries have been targeted. Supply depots have been targeted. Military infrastructure has been targeted. And in many cases, locations once considered safely beyond the front lines have suddenly found themselves vulnerable. The message behind these operations is clear. No place connected to the war effort should feel completely secure. For Ukraine, these attacks serve multiple purposes. They can disrupt logistics. They can force Russia to spend more money on defense. They can create uncertainty. And they can demonstrate that the conflict is no longer limited to the front lines. At the same time, Ukraine continues to rely heavily on support from its international partners. Weapons deliveries remain critical. Air defense systems remain critical. Financial assistance remains critical. Without external support, sustaining a long war would become significantly more difficult. This means diplomacy remains just as important as military action. Every new agreement, every new aid package, every new defense partnership, all of these contribute to Ukraine's ability to continue resisting Russian pressure. Meanwhile, Russia faces challenges of its own. Despite adapting to sanctions and maintaining significant military capabilities, the costs of war continue to accumulate. Military spending has increased dramatically. Economic priorities have shifted. And long-term uncertainty continues to affect investment and growth. None of this means Russia is on the verge of collapse. Far from it. But it does mean that the war carries consequences that extend far beyond the battlefield. And this is where the next phase of the conflict becomes especially important. Because the side that manages pressure more effectively may ultimately gain the strategic advantage. The coming months could reveal whether Ukraine's approach is capable of producing meaningful results. Or whether Russia can continue absorbing these challenges while maintaining its objectives. Either outcome would have enormous implications. Not just for Ukraine. Not just for Russia. But for Europe, NATO, global energy markets, and international security as a whole. And as you'll see later in this video, there is one development that could dramatically change everything, a development that many analysts believe is being underestimated right now. To understand why, we first need to look at what is happening behind the scenes, where strategy, economics, technology, and politics are colliding in ways that could shape the future of this war.